Screech by TarynMcT. Read by Oakshadow 5. Chapter 34. Izuku stood back and just took in the decor of his new room. He and Hitoshi had been allowed to come to the dorms a day earlier than the rest of the class to set up their rooms, since Dad and Papa had to come to the school to ensure that everything was prepared for the classes, and Izuku had decided to decorate this room differently than how his room at home was. He hadn't felt as though his living arrangements were stable enough to really ask for what he had wanted when he first started living with his new family, but now? Now they were stuck with him, and he was never letting them go. The first change he had made for his dorm room was removing the overhead light. While Izuku could easily handle bright lights, able to switch freely between dark and day vision, he preferred the darkness. Things seemed quieter and less stimulating, even if they weren't. To help his room be even darker, he had also replaced the curtains with dark green blackout curtains over the balcony. They could easily be pulled open if he had guests in his room, but if it was just him, his room was as dark as night. He had managed to paint his room too. He went with a light green with brown trim. He knew there was a good chance of having guests, and sometimes they would stay even past nightfall, so Izuku had replaced the overhead light with green LED lights running around the ceiling. They weren't bright enough for guests to do something like reading, but Izuku hadn't set up his room for group study anyways. Kiko had taken him and Toshi to the mall to pick out the bedding on the beds, and Izuku had picked out a dark green bedspread with brown sheets. Hitoshi had joked that he was making his room into a forest theme, and Izuku had smiled and said that was exactly what he was doing. The only thing he was bringing from his room at home were the two plushies that sat on his bed, a Pichu named Kamichu and a Rowlet named Owlzuku. There came a knock at the door and Izuku opened it. Hitoshi blinked and squinted at the darkness.
Dude, I can't see a thing.
Izuku laughed and clicked on the LED lights. Better?
Better enough for me to not trip as I open your damn curtains.
Hitoshi muttered as he did exactly that. As the curtains were opened, Hitoshi took a look around and hugged in appreciation.
It looks better than I thought it would.
I thought about putting tree decals on the walls, but decided to just leave it like this. Izuku smiled at his room. Are you done setting yours up? Hitoshi nodded.
Unlike you, I left the lights alone, so it didn't take nearly as long.
Izuku blew his bangs out of his face with an annoyed huff. I wanted to do something different, Izuku defended himself. Hitoshi laughed.
You know Tokoyami is going to do something similar, right? I doubt he'll do green lights, but I'm sure he'll take out the lights in his room.
Shrugging, Izuku said. Probably, but we like the dark, so why not take out the lights? He tugged on Hitoshi's sleeve. I want to see your room now. They left Izuku's room and went to the one next door.
It's nothing special.
Hitoshi shrugged as he opened the door. Hitoshi's room looked similar to his room at home, a lot of teal and black. Hitoshi's favorite color was teal, but he always said he looked bad in it, claiming the teal clashed with his purple hair and eyes. Izuku didn't think that was true, but what does he know? He actually likes wearing shirts that say socks on it. Izuku glanced around and saw that all the provided furniture had been replaced by black furniture. The drapes on the patio were gauzy black with an extra layer of teal blackout curtains, and he had painted his walls a dark teal. His bedding was a mess of teal, grey and black geometric patterns, with spirals and circles as the most predominant. The cutest part of the entire room had to be the plush cat that was sitting on Hitoshi's pillow, a perfectly split down the middle red and white cat. You brought Kitty Roki? Izuku laughed happily.
You said it as if you didn't bring Owlzuku and Kamichu.
Hitoshi lightly shoved Izuku. The next day, everyone had met up in front of the new 1A dorm building, Heights Alliance, and Hitoshi was waiting with them for Dad to show up. It was still fairly early in the morning, and Izuku was having a really hard time staying awake, so Denki was carrying Izuku on his back while he slept. Hitoshi was surprised that he was still sleeping, since the gathered class wasn't being very quiet, but Izuku really had been lethargic for the past few days. Hey, Shinzo? Aishido had walked up to him and gave Izuku a concerned look. What's up with Midoriya? Is he okay? Hitoshi nodded.
Yeah, he's fine. Something happened recently. I think Dad's going to explain when he gets here.
She nodded and walked back to where Kirishima was, and most likely shared what Hitoshi had just told her. It didn't take much longer for Dad to show up.
Alright, Hellspawn, listen up. Behind me is your new home for the remainder of your time at UA, Heights Alliance. I have low expectations for your behavior while here, but please try not to make me lower the bar further. There's a full list of rules that are to be followed, but I'll tell you the most important ones now. Do not set the dorm on fire. Do not break holes in the walls. Do not destroy the furniture. Who am I kidding? Let me rephrase that.
Dad said in defeat.
Do not set them on fire more than once a week. Do not break holes in the walls more than once a week. Do not destroy the furniture more than once a week.
Hitoshi would have laughed at that, but he remembered that while Shota was absolutely amazing, he could not cook. The threat of fire in the kitchen was very real. Come to think of it, he didn't think Momo knew how to cook either.
Now, I had originally planned to discuss this over the camp, but it was cut short, so I will say it now.
Hitoshi tilted his head a little, curious to where this was going.
Ojiro, Uraka, and Sato.
Oh, Hitoshi knew where this was going.
The three of you performed particularly poorly at the camp. I was going to give you until the end of the camp to set yourself straight before you were dropped onto General Ed. But now you have until the start of term.
The three of them looked at each other in mild panic before turning their attention back to Dad, who continued.
There is going to be an event before the start of term, and it is either a pass or fail event. If you do not pass, you will not be continuing on in 1A. Am I clear?
Sato and Uraraka both gulped and nodded, with a quick, Yes, Sensei. Hitoshi thought Ojiro, however, might have suffered brain damage recently, because he said, But Sensei, that's not fair. How can you punish us over this when Midoriya didn't even bother showing up? And even now, he's just sleeping and not paying attention to any of what's going on. Dad narrowed his eyes at Ojiro and then grinned. Oh no, that was his happy, yet sadistic, grin. Ojiro was not about to have a good time.
I thought I made myself clear on the first day of class,
Dad said.
The world isn't fair. Since you seem so worried about Izuku, I will tell you why he is being exempt from this.
Everyone was looking at him expectantly.
I am sure you all remember the student who was expelled during the first week of school. Yes.
He paused as everyone nodded.
Shortly before the camp started, he found and attacked Izuku while at the mall. 7 were injured and 5 were killed in that attack, all while Izuku was the target. He was not in the right headspace to attend camp. Furthermore, when Hitoshi was abducted, Izuku joined the raid team to retrieve him. In that battle, he was injured. He is temporarily unable to use his wings. He is using a lot of stamina in healing his injury, so he'll fall asleep often. He should be fully recovered before second term starts.
You let him go on a raid? Kirishima piped up, banging his fists together. That's so manly. Wait! Ashido exclaimed, loud enough to where Izuku, deep asleep, let out a small hoot in protest and buried his face in Denki's neck. The news said Mike Sensei worked with a UA student to be the villain that killed All Might. Was that Mido? I thought they were talking about an older student. Ashido. Hitoshi hissed at her. When she looked up at him, he hissed again and gestured at Izuku, who was once again staring on Denki's back. Shh!
Don't wake him up.
Izuku let out a sleepy chirp, but fell asleep again quickly. Ashido whispered a quick, Sorry, and covered her mouth. Dad nodded at the class.
Go inside. I'm trusting you to keep things down to a dull roar. Try not to wake Izuku. Hitoshi, you know where the room assignments are. I'm going to have a discussion with Ojiro. Then I'll be inside.
Hitoshi watched as Ojiro gulped, and then he let the rest of the class inside. Whatever Dad had to discuss with him was none of his business, though Hitoshi was fairly sure the tailed boy wouldn't be joining them in Heights Alliance for the upcoming school year.
All right,
Hitoshi said.
Over there are the elevators, but you can also take stairs. Left side is boys, right is girls. Here's the list of who has what room, and your names are also on the doors.
Hitoshi gestured at the room assignment chart and then stood aside as everyone started looking. Wait a minute, Shiro muttered, confused. Who's Takami? Yeah, and where's Mido, bro? Asked Kirishima. Hitoshi blinked at them and smacked his forehead.
That's right, his name already got updated.
Hitoshi grinned at everyone.
You all know Izuku's been living with me and my dad for a while. Well, my dad adopted him. Izuku got to change his name, and as you all know, he's not really a fan of Midoriya, so he changed it. His new name is Takami Izuku.
Izuku chirped happily. I almost went with Shinzo, but almost everyone still calls Toshi that. Izuku kissed Denki on the cheek and slipped him to stand on his own. Good morning, everyone. Good morning, Izu-chan, Carol, crowed Asui. I'm glad to see you're feeling better. Thanks, Tsu-chan. He turned to Denki. You're on the 3rd floor. I help you set up your room if you want.
We're waiting for Dad. He's still outside talking to Ojiro.
Hitoshi interjected before Izuku could drag Denki upstairs. Oh, he cocked his head and winced. Yeah, he won't be long. Sure enough, Dad entered alone a few minutes later. Uraka and Sato paled, coming to the same conclusion Hitoshi had. Ojiro was expelled.
All right, now, where was I?
Dad asked as he returned to address the remaining 15 students.
Ah, yes. Some of you may have noticed that neither Hagakure nor Aoyama are present. They have both decided to drop out of the hero course. While you may still see Hagakure on campus, as she has transferred to the business course, Aoyama has returned to France.
There was shocked silence among the students, none having thought that anyone would willingly drop out of the hero course. Dad nodded and continued on with her speech.
You have the rest of today to get set into your new rooms and figure out some method for assigning chores. If you don't have a chores schedule by tomorrow, I will be making one for you.
He waited for everyone to nod in acknowledgement.
Good. Now, if you need me for anything, you all know how to reach me. I'm going to take a nap.
And with that, Dad left them to fend for themselves. Izuku yawned as he stepped into the gym with the rest of his classmates. Dad had told them all to change into their hero costumes and meet in the gym, so here he was, practically asleep on his feet, but ready to participate.
One of the main goals of the training camp was for you all to be ready to take your professional licensing exam before the start of the next term. The first week was supposed to strengthen your quirks, while the second week was supposed to be working on super moves.
Dad stated, looking around at everyone.
You all should have at least 2 super moves, and since the camp was cut short, you will be working on them here.
There was excited chatter among the class before Zero raised a hand. Can you give us an example of a super move? Dad shrugged and pointed lazily at Izuku.
He's got a few of them. His Screech is probably the most obvious, but that's not to say his talents and the way he uses them don't also count, as does his silent flight. Those are just 3 of his moves. As for myself, I have my binding cloth as a super move.
He shrugged.
Your super move doesn't have to do with your quirk. It just needs to be something that gives you an advantage.
As the class spread out on the gym with ectoplasm clones, Izuku yawned again and started towards a clone of his own when Dad placed a hand on his shoulder.
You already have your super moves, as well as your license. Instead of joining with these classes, I'm going to have you meet up with Nezu instead.
Okay, so going forward, at least for now, don't bother changing into my costume and just go to Nezu's office?
Yes.
Okay, I'll change back and hit the now, I guess, Izuku asked.
Try to keep the world domination to a minimum, okay?
Dad joked. Izuku chirped and headed back to the locker room to change. Once he was done, he went into the school and headed up to Nezu's office. Ah, Izuku-kun, so nice of you to join me. And we're down 3 more students, what the heck? There's now only 15 students remaining in 1A. But anyways guys, I hope you all enjoyed chapter 34 of Screech, and I'll see you all next time. Bye!